everyone. Thank you for joining us for our November 1st Friday, where it's quite a weird one because once Mike and I are not talking, but we have got Craig Millward here speaking with us today, and Mike will share a bit more about Craig in a moment. But for those of you who don't know, or if you're watching us for the first time, welcome to the First Fridays. If you're here, it'd be lovely to share in the chat where you're from. And obviously, if you're watching, do feel free to get in touch with us if you'd like to find out anything else or just want to get in touch with us. That's nice to hear from people. If you don't know who Mike and I are, my name's Hannah. I'm a digital missionary comms consultant, and Mike is the communications manager for Baptist Together. And obviously we've been doing these First Fridays over the year as we approach our second to last one, helping people from any aspect within comms responsibility. So whether that's people who are employed or those who are doing it voluntary or those who just have an interest. So we hope that they have been helpful and offered some useful tips and resources, as well as some sort of challenging or kind of points to engage you with. I feel like everyone knows what we're doing here, but again, if you're new, the monthly gatherings, we do first half of sort of focus talk on a specific topic, and then we'll have a second half of questions and conversation. So especially today, it would be really good if you had any questions for us to chat with Craig afterwards. Recordings and slides and anything will be emailed afterwards, but again, yeah, do ask questions in the chat or wait till the end section. So that's it from me and housekeeping. I will pass over to Mike to introduce Craig.
Thank you, Hannah. Well, I'm really pleased to welcome and just chat for a brief time about Craig. Now, Craig, I've had the blessing of having to know for several years now. But Craig is one of these people you have to have in your life, and if he, now you will all meet Craig today. But Craig is just brilliant. One of the sharpest minds you'll meet. He's a speaks brilliantly, challenges, has got a prophetic edge, and has got vast experience over his 30 years as a Baptist minister, and is somebody who, by default, sort of questions, challenges the norms. Craig has got a very broad experience of ministry, and one of the ways in which the whole of Baptist Together have been blessed over the past couple of years is that Craig has been significantly leading our disability justice angles and responses, part of the disability justice group and the new disability theology group. And if everybody was sent one of part of our disability church and faith, basically a curated selection of blogs that are all on our website at the start of the year. If you haven't looked at this, please do online, or hopefully you will have a printed version still at church. So Craig's been brought in today, and he will offer his thoughts, experiences and stories and reflections from what he sees and views. And I know that he'll be looking at deconstructing about the medium in which we experience church on a Sunday in particular, and just to help us all think a little bit deeper about how we communicate. The whole point of First Friday was communication very broadly. The last couple of ones have been sort of very focused on software and artificial intelligence, and then sometimes we need to step back and actually think about, what are we doing here, and how should we actually reflect on this going forward? So I will hand over now to Craig, and we look forward to hearing what you've got to share. Thanks, Craig.
I've just unmuted my, sorry, I had to have a cough, so I muted myself. Okay. Right, thanks. It's good to be with you. To be honest, I am aware that what I'm going to say is perhaps a little bit different to anything that you've done recently, and that is, as Mike has said, that's just because I seem to think differently and seem to do differently, and I remember when I was at Spurgeon's, one of the most helpful experiences I had was we had someone come in and do the bell bin with us, the bell bin team roles, and I came out as a plant shaper, which basically means that I am unlike most other Baptist ministers, according to the guy that was leading our session, because I do sit on the edge, I do ask questions, and I do wonder aloud sometimes, and so this is very much a wondering aloud. Let me tell you a story. When I was leading my last church, there's one particular Sunday, I'd planned and prepared, and everything was ready to go, and I stood up at the lectern, and as people were coming, silence was beginning to descend, and I was almost ready to begin the service. A little voice in my ear, and not a loud voice, not one, you know, I'm not going crazy. A little voice in my ear said, "Why are you doing this?" And it said, "You did this last week, and the week before, and the week before that. You've been doing this for 19 years. What you said last week was pretty good, according to what people said at the door, but none of us are putting it into practice. We're not configured in such a way as to put these things into practice. We're just entertaining people for another Sunday, and they'll go out and they'll say how wonderful the service was." And I stood there and I thought, what am I doing? What have I been doing? I'm doing it the way I was taught to do it at college. I've developed that over a course of many years, but what actually are we doing? Because I'd learned during my sabbatical, not long before that, that Jesus' method of not just teaching, but actually method of discipling was pretty unique. In his day, I mean, he was obviously considered a rabbi. Most other rabbis would choose the sharpest minds. They choose the ones who they choose the ones who they were confident would be capable, after many years study alongside the rabbi, to pretty much repeat everything that their rabbi had taught them. But again, it was all cerebral. It was all kind of in the mind. It was all, you know, the rabbi's distinctive teachings. But Jesus was very different. He allowed a number of different people to join him who had no great potential. We know that they were from different backgrounds. We know that they were sometimes divided amongst themselves. They weren't the sharpest tools in the box. And he worked with them for 3 years and turned them into a group of individuals who didn't just kind of know in their heads what it was, the message that Jesus was teaching, but they actually became individuals who carried not just a message, but actually a lifestyle. And obviously the early church was based on those individuals, and on what they passed on to others. And so when at the end of Matthew's gospel, Jesus says, "Go into all the world and disciple people as I have discipled you," he wasn't saying, you know, teach people the Beatitudes and the various teachings as other rabbis would have done. He was saying, look, work with people in the same way I have worked with you, and put this stuff into practice. So an example, you know, when Jesus washes the disciples' feet in John chapter 13, he says, "You'll be blessed if you do these things." Jesus' methodology wasn't just cerebral. It was kind of, let's do this, let's do it together. And so right at the beginning of the Gospels, we find that Jesus invites all who will follow him. There's the 12, but there's also a larger group of people who quite clearly are around. It includes women, which is unusual, because rabbis of that day would again, it was a male dominated society. Jesus allowed pretty much anybody to follow him, and he was confident that whoever followed him for a period of time would experience the benefit of learning to live the life of a disciple. So all of that was in the background as I was standing up in front of the lectern and thinking, you know what? I think I've got it wrong. If I'm expecting to fill people's mind with ideas that I'm wanting them to put into practice, if I'm not showing them how to do it, and if we're not working together as if we're not building the kind of learning community which enables us to learn together, to share life kind of more intimately, more honestly, more openly. And that led to I obviously stood up and did the service that I'd planned, but that really did plant something in my mind. And for the next several weeks, I began thinking and then talking to my leadership team and just asking. We just asked a whole load of questions, because as a plant and a shaper, as someone who stands on the edge, I was always asking to myself, if somebody walks in through this door who's never been into this place before, what is it they're going to understand that this church is all about? And hence my choice of the Marshall McLuhan quote: "The medium is the message." As people, as a visitor comes and observes what we're doing, observes the medium, what message are they going to get? And it seemed to me that what they were going to learn is that what they were going to discover is that we were focused on a Sunday morning. It was about being quiet. It was about listening. It wasn't about doing. It was a temple model. Let me explain that, what I mean by that. In the days of Jesus, there were two places in which Jews would worship. They would go to the temple, but not very regularly, because there's only one temple, obviously, and that was where priests would perform a ceremony. But most of their time was actually spent in synagogues. Synagogues were small groups of people based in a family home. The leader would be the leader of a family, and that was where most of their discipleship, very much using the apprentice model, most of their discipleship would happen. Now, a visitor to a church on a Sunday morning wouldn't see the synagogue model enacted. They see the temple model run by professionals. Of course, in some denominations, they are also called priests, which again is an Old Testament symbol, where professionals do the stuff and everybody else just sits, watches, listens, and maybe takes on board whatever they're being given from the front. The sitting in a rows. Again, what's the message conveyed by us sitting in rows, facing the same direction, not face to face with each other, but facing in the same direction, listening to those professionals? What's the message that's being portrayed? Well, probably that the laity are passive and the clergy are the ones who do the work. Well, again, is that what Jesus did? There were times when he obviously taught, but there were many, many times when he sent the disciples out. He'd say, "This is what I've shown you how to do. Now go and do it." Well, there's not a huge amount of going and doing it illustrated in a typical Sunday service model. The singing songs chosen by a worship leader. A visitor might come in and think, "Well, what's all this about? Singing songs to a God I can't see, about how wonderful he is." But how easy would people find it to engage with that God simply based on the words of the songs that we sing? And then perhaps the visitor might look around and think to themselves, "You're talking about," I mean, it's full of flowery language, they might think. It's full of incredibly positive language, but is this true of this group of people? Can it really be true that all these people are filled with so much joy at the same time every Sunday? I'd like to get to know these people a bit, but it feels like these songs that they're singing they just feel a bit unreal. Are these things really being experienced in the moment as the songs seem to illustrate that they are. And so what's the message that's being portrayed to a visitor? Well, I think there's a degree of confusion happening there. And I've certainly spoken to very many visitors at the end of a Sunday service who pretty much say to me, well, we quite enjoyed what we saw, but there's a lot of stuff that we didn't understand. And then, of course, everything seems, certainly in a Baptist context anyway, everything seems to lead to the sermon, where one person stands and talks to the group of people for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, depending on the particular church that you're part of. And it's a teaching model rather than a learning model. It's a classroom model, which again, Jesus didn't use a huge amount. It's a classroom model rather than let's try these things out together. Let's do these things. Let's apply these to everyday life. Let's ask a series of questions. Jesus was so good at asking questions. He did that all the time. So if the medium is the message, what message are we proclaiming by the medium that we are committed to? Now, I'm obviously assuming that the model that you're used to is a fairly typical model. I might be completely wrong in assuming that, but I'm simply telling you my story. As we began talking as a leadership team and thinking, what is it that we are expecting to happen on a Sunday? And is it actually what Jesus wanted to happen? Is it actually what Jesus did? And can we do it better? I began thinking through the whole process of learning, the whole process of growth, the way in which humans grow, the whole point of community. Most positive growth happens within community, whether that community be a church type community or whether it be a recovery group or whatever. That there are things that you can do within community which hugely help people to embed not just new thinking, but to embed new behaviors, to learn to live differently, to take risks, to make yourselves accountable to somebody else for actually taking some risks occasionally. So what we did is we thought, okay, let's not consider the model, the Sunday service model, sacrosanct. Let's kind of begin with a clean sheet of paper and how would we do it differently if we took learning more seriously rather than teaching? And what we decided to do was base what we did on a Sunday much more closely around a synagogue model as opposed to a temple model, because our focus, what I wanted our focus to be, was not so much on learning but on doing. So what we did was this. We had a fairly long consultation and process, and we talked through the numerous church meetings and spent some time sort of laying some foundations, which led to a completely different way of doing Sundays. And what happened was this: we decided that what we do is we spend the first Sunday of every month in an all-age context. So we had a brilliant group of all-age leaders. They do some amazing services, always based on visuals and stuff that the children could engage with, and often we got the children actually reflecting and teaching us things. They were just basically very, very practical, engagement with a particular theme. So what we said we do is we'll set a theme at the beginning of each month, and the first bite at the cherry will be our all-age leaders, and I remember one particular Sunday, the leader of the all-age service, I think he built himself a boat at the front of the church out of wood, and it was obviously, I think it was one of Jesus' parables from the boat, and he got people in the boat and out of the boat. And I mean, but basically, we put the chairs to the edge, and it was just hugely practical, getting everybody physically involved in the service. And I can't remember what the theme of the service or the theme of the month was, but everybody was getting up, everybody was doing it. So that those who are kinesthetic learners, they were right engaged in the middle of it all. They were, and so that first Sunday was the all age Sunday anyway, and we'd allow ourselves permission to do it in whatever way we wanted to do it. Okay, so the first Sunday was a kind of all age Sunday, all hands on deck, and then what we do on the second Sunday is that would be the teaching Sunday, and so it would be the most like a traditional service we would have, and it would be 30-40 minute sermon on the particular theme. And what I'd then do is I'd give everybody a summary, the main points, so they could take it home. And then third Sundays, what we did, this was the most radical thing that we did. On the third Sunday, we would meet in groups that we spent a long time putting together. We called them life groups, and they would meet in people's homes. One of them met in the church, because obviously if visitors turn up on a Sunday not knowing what we're doing, we'd actually have one of them in the building. But and that would include all ages, and they'd be geographical groups, mostly. We'd allow people to choose their own groups, but the purpose of those groups was to take the theme that we'd done the previous 2 weeks, and I set us all a series of questions, but they'd be practical questions. They wouldn't be kind of theoretical or theological questions. Practical questions. If this is, so for example, it might be loving our enemies or something like that. I talked about it, unpacked it over 2 Sundays. What does that mean for us right now? How would we do it? Who considers themselves an enemy in your life right now? What's Jesus calling you to do? What's God calling you to do? And what we do is we'd focus on application, and we'd also ask at the end of that very much more informal time together, we'd actually ask people to say, well, look, is God challenging you to do anything over the course of this next week? Is there anything that you want to that God's calling you to do? And if you'd like to just tell us what it is, then we'll pray for you, and we'll support you, and so often you'd have people really finding themselves challenged and kind of thinking, well, I'm actually going to do something, and I'm going to tell my small group, this is what I'm going to do. And often it'll be I'll have a conversation with that person who's offended me, or I'll do something about it. And then on the fourth Sunday, it will be an open mic. So I'd introduce it, and I'd introduce the theme again very briefly, and then it would be a kind of, okay, well, look, we've spent 3 weeks looking at this practical theme. Last week we met in homes, and just what's happened. What's some of us, well, we've all been seeking to put into practice what we've learned over the previous 3 weeks, just to tell us what's happened. And honestly, that Sunday, that fourth Sunday, could so often be so profound. I can think of one particular occasion springs to mind, but there's loads I could choose from. We talked about Jesus' command not to judge each other. And actually, I mean, what Jesus says about judgment is profound. He says in John's Gospel, there's a lot of sort of verses which sort of progress that judgment theme. And so, just to summarize, just for you now, he says first of all that God is the judge, but he's given the right to his son Jesus to do it. So Jesus is saying, I have the right to judge, but I choose not to. He then says we are not to judge each other, and that any judgment we make about each other will be will rebound on us, essentially, in a sense that God, God says that you'll be judged in the same way that you judge others. So therefore, the command is not to judge, not to make negative judgments on people, but just to, and therefore to listen, to actually be open to God, to asking Him, how do you perceive this person? How do you view them? What is it you'd like me to be for this person in this moment? That's what we've done on the Sunday, because of course, jumping in and making a judgment, it very often prevents us from being Jesus in any given situation. So on this open mic fourth Sunday, I can remember a woman called Lynn. She'd never spoken in church before, and she came trembling to the front, literally trembling to the front, and she said, I've got a story to tell you. She said, we decided in our group that we would monitor our listening, or monitor what's going on in our heads over the course of the next 7 days. And she said, I went to the park a couple of days ago with my young son, and he was playing on the swings and whatever, and I was sitting on the bench watching Joe play in the sun, and over the other side of the play park was another woman, and she was there with a child, and the child was playing a bit with Joe, and then this child kept calling out to this woman, and she was ignoring him, and she said, what I felt welling up within me was just this growing anger towards her. You're ignoring your child. How dare you? What a terrible mother you must be. And because this was going on and on and on, and she was getting more and more kind of distressed at this child being ignored. Anyway, and then she said, "Oh my goodness, what's going on? What I'm judging her." And she said, "Oh, okay." And so she's just prayed for her. She said, then 10 minutes later, 10 minutes or so later, the woman came over to her and sat next to her, and she said they got into conversation, and that was the point at which she learned that this woman wasn't the child's mother, she was his grandmother, and that the child's mother was currently in hospital having a serious operation, and that this woman was obviously concerned about her daughter, and she was really struggling to hold it together. And she said to Lynn, she said, "Thank you for listening to me. I really feel so much better now," and walked away. And Lynn thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? I've made the assumption that it was the child's mother, and I've constructed a story which wasn't true at all. And then she was saying, oh, thank you, God, that you gave me an opportunity. You gave me a second chance, not to cut her off because of the judgment I'd made, but she gave me that second chance to just sit and to listen. And she said, that's all I did. I didn't get a chance to talk about God or Jesus or anything else. I just had an opportunity to listen and to discover what was really going on. That was just one story I remember, but those are the sort of things that would happen on a Sunday, on the fourth Sunday, as we would feed back, or we'd tell stories about what we'd learned. And then sometimes, of course, there's a fifth Sunday, and what we would do on a fifth Sunday is we would give ourselves permission just to do something. I mean, one particular fifth Sunday, we went to the beach and we built sandcastles on the beach together as a big church family. And one of the great things about that was that there were other people on the beach as well who joined us. And so we had many, many more people joining us on that particular Sunday than we'd ever had before when we were sitting in a church building. And we told them what we were doing, and they thought it was really funny that here's a church, a church community building sandcastles on the beach. So all I'm saying here is that we just thought we want to focus not so much on teaching, but on learning. And we want to harness the power of community in that process, because Church as it's constructed, with the temple model, sitting in rows, singing songs chosen by a worship leader, which may or may not be true for all or for most on that particular occasion. Focused on a sermon and going out after having heard something, we're then on our own to try and put it into practice. That is bad practice if what we're expecting is that people are actually going to change and change consistently. And so we recognize that actually change best happens within community. And so what we want to then do is form little mini communities of people who are expecting to change and who are involving each other in that change process. We did that for several years, and to be honest, it was a real challenge to start with. A lot of people really didn't want to do it. Some people even left the church because they thought this isn't the kind of church that we want to be part of. Not very many did, but some people did. And some people refused to engage in that third Sunday at all because it was kind of too much for them. But the vast majority of the church found it such a helpful process, because of course Jesus calls us to grow and to change and to become more like him. And we weren't just telling people what they should do, but we were helping people to become the sort of people that Jesus was wanting them to become. And what I see us as doing is that we were bringing the medium and the message closer together. So that then, after the course of about a year, what we then found is that people were beginning to not just learn how to, or not just be challenged and changing in their own individual lives, but they were also beginning to ask questions about what life means, and about how they could serve God within the context of a larger community. And so, for example, we wanted each of the small groups to have some form of worship focus. Some would use liturgy, some would use music, and we had a number of new musicians. And my son was actually one of these, who wouldn't have stood up in church on a Sunday morning leading worship prior to this, because our worship leaders were very professional. But my son was learning guitar, but actually had the confidence within a small group to lead worship within our small group, and actually became really quite a proficient worship leader. But he was he was a teenager. He was 15, 16, 17 years old. And he actually went on to lead the whole church community on a Sunday morning, because he'd been given that opportunity to use the gifts that he was developing, gifts for music. We had loads of examples of people like that. And we actually formed a number of ministry teams as a result of that, because we had people who were asking, who were growing, and who were challenging themselves and challenging each other to do things that God was calling them to do, and that led to them coming forward, and we gave them freedom to develop all sorts of different creative ideas, because those ideas had come to the fore during those smaller groups. So my question then, to myself and to the church all the time, as I'm currently working with the Northumbria Collective, and one of the questions that we're kind of always asking people to do is reflect on Jesus' call to us to become disciples, recognizing that we don't become disciples on our own, by ourselves, just as Jesus harnessed the benefit of community, and used the effects of community really effectively. Churches, if we're expecting people to follow Jesus, then churches have opportunities that almost very few other community groups have, to help people to connect, and to be of real support and encouragement to each other. So that's the question I want to ask you. What is the message that your Sunday service or anything that you do or you lead or you're part of, what is the message that your medium is telling, and how might we change, given that we have the freedom to do whatever we want, but we tend to do the same thing week in, week out, because that's what we think people like. So what's the message, and how is the medium that you're choosing, how is that coherent with the message that we've been given? There's my question.
Thank you, Craig. That was as brilliant as I knew it would be. So I will give it a little clap there. I've written loads of notes, which I shall be personally reflecting on as going through. Hannah, what? And I think you'll join us as well. Hannah, what were your immediate thoughts on that? I've got loads, but I thought I let you go first.
I need to unmute myself. So I can't read my writing now. One of the first things you said, Craig, was about like first impressions, and I know that kind of you were speaking specifically about coming into the building and on site, but I think it is that is so important. As someone who over the last few years has gone to visit lots of new churches, it's been interesting sort of trying a new church for the first time and going, oh, are you aware of how this makes sort of people feel? And I'm a happy, confident Christian. I'm getting blinded at the minute. So I always do think kind of first impressions, and again of like, if the social media is your kind of shop front of like, again, what are your first impressions? If everything looks massively out of date on your website, how's that going to what's the impression that people are going to give there? So yeah, first impressions I think are important. What's the message that we are proclaiming? And again, of like, how are we translating that into what we're doing, both in our community on site, within people we engage with, but also then like online, of like, are we shouting about the things that we're shouting about individually in house groups and stuff like does that translate to external comms and stuff like that? You know, we have this most amazing message. Other thing as well of like different ways. I can't remember how you were saying it, but people learning in different ways. And I think again of like, actually what we put out, not everything, you know, needs to be really long written. Some people now are a lot more on you know, learning visually, of like videos help, or listening to something. And so actually, are we doing that with, again, things that we put out? Learning, you said not teaching but learning from each other, and I think that's really important just generally within churches. And community, again, I think that's hugely important, of how as well that translates from on site to those who are deeply embedded and involved with the church, to those people who are new, to those who engage online, or those who are sort of just testing out online. And then what was the question? You ended with coherent with the message. You said so that was kind of the few words I read. But again, of like, is everything aligning with what we are teaching and preaching and talking and discussing in the week within small groups? And how's that being projected? Not just online, even though that's where my kind of mind immediately goes, but sort of how we portray ourselves in our community and sort of to new people. So yeah, those are my kind of scribblings.
Brilliant, thanks, Hannah. So some of the things for which Hannah's already mentioned, but some of the things that I thought about, particularly broadly, I think going away and considering medium as a whole is massively helpful for those in the space here now and watching this afterwards, thinking so carefully about, as Craig has so well articulated, of how you bring message and medium together. And I love how you explored this as a community, and one of the sort of light bulbs moment for me was there where you was talking about harnessing the power of community, where people can, and most crucially, expect to change. And I don't think a lot of us would go to church each week expecting to change. They would think, it would be a happy byproduct, whereas in fact your model really actively encouraged every month through your themes and the way that the message and the medium were thought about carefully, is that by the end of that, people were expecting to change. And that change, as you brilliantly showed with the playground story, all of a sudden it was a small instance where I know that would have been very profound for the rest of their Christian lives with that. I also like, just towards the end, obviously you talked about your son learning the guitar, and the fact that third Sunday became a safe space for nurturing new gifting. And yeah, as somebody who by default was never used to talking in public, that's it, I didn't go to church. I didn't go to church until I was nearly 30. And as I felt a prompt to explore ministry, I was terrified of going from pew to front. I mean, when I went up to the front, I literally saw stars those first few months. I was literally hanging on to my consciousness. I was that scared. And that's not a safe space. That's not a nurturing space. Whereas your model of, sharing that within small groups and allowing something to grow, isn't it? It's that, you've got the metaphor of planting seeds and putting them nicely in a greenhouse and watering them and feeding them and keeping them safe. And out of you don't just plant a little seedling out in the middle of the garden and expect it to survive. And I think that's a brilliant example of the medium helping the message and helping somebody to develop. I think this has been really helpful, Craig, and I'm hoping for those that are here and those looking afterwards can go away and just consider really carefully, as Hannah's also indicated, across the broad things that we've looked over this year, of now really considering the medium, whatever we're trying to communicate, is this medium actually helping us communicate our message of a loving God made flesh in Jesus Christ. So thank you, Craig.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's good to, thank you for asking me.